Welcome, everyone, to the Scale Lab, brought to you by TechLeap. If you're looking for the place where we break down what it takes to scale a tech company from the Netherlands, you've come to the right spot. I'm Joe Wilson, one of your hosts. Think of me like a mountain bike, like an American-made mountain bike. You know, the kind that you buy but you never really ride into the mountains anywhere. And my co-host is like that really smooth street cruiser, built purpose for the Netherlands. Constantijn. We have another illustrious guest here in the lab today.
Yes, we do.
Street cruiser.
Exactly. I would say that I definitely don't go into the mountains with my bike. But thanks, Joe, for that introduction. We have with us Ali Niknam, the founder of bunq, and other
and others. Let's not limit to one company here.
Exactly,
right?
And that's actually where I would just want to kind of dive deep in. Where did your drive and your passion come from? You had a really successful business. You're doing well. Why start an online bank?
Well, if you're the mountain bike and you're the street cruiser, can I then be the second-hand BMX? Totally useless, but 100% fun.
With a lot of tricks.
Yeah.
Fun and functional.
Yeah.
Fun and functional. Where did my drive come from? I don't know. I've always been like this. So this question has been asked to me before. And it's difficult for me to answer because you are what you are. And for me, it's the other way around. I don't know any different. I don't need a reason in the morning to get up and do what I do. For me, it's the opposite. When I get up in the morning and I'm full of energy and I, want to apply that energy, I always wonder, what do I apply it in? So the question I ask myself is a different one.
But is there an anger? Why do you want to build a bank?
Are you pissed about something? Like, why go?
There's a lot of frustration. Okay, so that's fair. There's a lot of frustration because I think, like so many others, I see how beautiful the world can be. And I look around and I see all these opportunities, how we can be better as humans, better as a world, better as a collective. And when that doesn't happen, that frustrates me. And that frustration, if it's big enough, gets applied to actually fixing it. So I think frustration is a part of it. And this can be about small things. Like, I think like 10 years ago, I got an interview and I wasn't happy with the door handles. And a guy was like, how can you be frustrated about door handles? We just had a new office of Trans IP. And the door handles weren't right. And I told him, you know what? Let's pause the interview. I'll show you. And then I showed him the door handles, and he was like, "Can I swear?" Can I say like "fuck"? So,
Yeah.
like,
You can say whatever you want.
BMX, right?
You can say "fuck." It's okay. Yeah.
He was like, "Fuck, you're right." No, and I think this world can be significantly better. Sometimes people are cynical, or they're tired, or they're like, "This, it's never gonna get better than this." And I feel like Europe is in that space for a couple of years now. Like, it's never going to be as good as this. Let's savor the moment. And, there's nothing that can be better. And that troubles me deeply because I see a lot of points where we can do a whole lot better. And I think we need to do a whole lot better for the sake of everyone. But anyway, so yeah, it frustrates me and I pick up the gloves and I...
Door handles.
The door handle.
So that's
it's
a fantastic. It's a metaphorical OCD type of comment there, right? Like you're like the guy must have been thinking you were a little nuts, but then you said just practically touch it and see.
Yeah.
I mean, is that the way the story goes?
Yeah. So there were. So we had, I think, 40 door handles. 25 of them, the swing of the door handle, 25 of them went deep, 15 didn't.
But look, Ali, isn't that
just
more
drives you nuts?
I see that as I see it, and full disclosure, I'm on the supervisory board for bunq, so like everyone, we know each other. But I see that as there's an attention to a craft.
Yeah.
And you get pissed or emotionally motivated when someone hasn't paid attention to the craft, whatever the craft may be. Is that a fair way to say it?
That's a fair way to say it.
And do you apply this to across your business? Could you give an example how that works in the way you run your business?
Well, I can give another example. The coffee machine at bunq. You've experienced it. You haven't, I think, Constantijn. No. But everybody makes the same mistake. there's a coffee machine. To paint the picture, there's a coffee machine. It has different coffees, like espresso or cappuccino or whatever. Everybody, they look at the machine, put their cup in the cup holder, press cappuccino, nothing happens. Apparently, on the bottom row, there's a start button that you also must press before it actually dispenses. So my point is, to answer your question, I see all this stuff. And for me, it is not a given that a coffee machine should have a separate button to start. So when I see something like that, I see an opportunity and I think, hey, the intuitive way of building a coffee machine is apparently not by having a start button. And although this might sound weird, that really is at the basis of everything I do. I just see things, I see the interaction of people with things, I see where the world is heading, and I think, okay, you know what? Let's remove the start button.
But is this a drive to serve the customer, or is this a drive to perfection, or is this, you observe it and you think this is basically a striving for excellence or for improving stuff? When you look deep into yourself, where does this come from?
I think if you can see how things can be better, why wouldn't you? I just don't get that. Why wouldn't you? I honestly don't get that. And I know it's not a given for everybody, because there's also a great power into accepting things the way they are. That's just not me.
But how do you make choices? Because there is so much to improve everywhere. You could go after the system. You mentioned Europe. You can look at the world. There's so much to improve.
Yeah.
Where do you choose to apply yourself?
That's a really difficult question. And that's a great question, because it took me about, I think, a year and a half to decide to start bunq. Not because it was difficult to see how things could be improved, but because I wasn't sure if the problem was big enough to deserve my attention without wanting to sound arrogant. But then a couple of things came together, and I saw, on the one hand, that the impact of the financial crisis, because that's the beginning of bunq, was so profound and so big, and it touched so many people's lives, that I thought, okay, well, that's the thing. Secondly, I noticed that the problem was and is very abstract. So, when a roof is leaking, it is quite tangible and it's quite visible, and there is no. But if a banking system isn't functioning, that is an abstract concept, because money is abstract, banking is abstract, finance is abstract. So, and things that are out of our view typically don't get fixed as much as things that are within our view. So that was the second thing. And then the third thing was, and this was gravely concerning to me, I'm an engineer and I have an engineering mindset. When I see something is broken, I like to fix it. I don't care why it got broken. I don't care who broke it. I don't care, who's to blame and by how much. I just want it fixed, because, the blame doesn't really help us any forward. But at the time, and I guess you guys recall, all newspapers, all politicians, everybody was concerned about was who was to blame, why did we get here, by how much was anyone to blame, should somebody go to prison, and maybe they should, but that didn't fix the problem. So when I saw those three things, I figured, okay, nobody's going to be crazy enough to do this stuff, so I'll just do it. Wasn't planning on doing it for 10
And what was
years.
the problem you needed fixing?
The lack of diversity in the financial sector. And I know diversity has since then become a thing.
Yeah.
But I mean it in a broader perspective.
Diversity of choice.
Diversity of choice, diversity of business models, diversity of product offerings, diversity of risk models, diversity of people, obviously, diversity of thought.
But you, by bringing your addition to it, that doesn't immediately bring diversity. It's just one different way of doing things.
Well, what we did,
I think you want to do more than just bringing becoming a player in the game is one extra supplier. That's not diversity. I think you try to do more.
Yeah. So what we did is we got the first banking permit in 35 years. Right, that's a big thing. Nobody thought it was possible. And by doing so, we opened the door that was closed for a very long time. And you've seen other neobanks pop up. And I don't want to take all the credit and stuff because obviously the regulators also changed their perspective and their point of view. So that's not the point. But we were the first to breach that barrier and help them into a different mindset. We also did so by introducing a completely different business model. Our business model is very different to traditional banks. Traditional banks are like second-hand car salesmen. They get money as cheaply as possible and they put it out there as expensive as possible. And therefore, the more margin they make, the more profit they make. So the intrinsic motivation of that business model, like with second-hand car salesmen, is to buy the car as cheap as possible. As we all know, when you have a car with a roof,
Dented
roof thing, what's zonnedak?
Sunroof.
Sunroof, yeah. The car salesman, but sunroofs always leak, so I'm going to give you 500 less. And then on the other hand, when you buy a car with a sunroof, it's like, but this car has a sunroof, so it's 500 more. It is not because inherently the second-hand car salesman is a bad person. It is a logical consequence of the business model. He can make more margin by pointing these things out. The same goes for banks, right? When you want to apply for a loan, as we all know, as any entrepreneur knows, by the way, the collateral you have to put up often far exceeds the loan you're actually applying for. And at the same time, because you're an entrepreneur and maybe you don't have a track record or your collateral is this or the market is doing that, your interest rate is high. Whereas at the same time, as we all know, the interest rate we get on our bank accounts is 0 and sometimes even negative. And this is a logical consequence of this business model. Conversely, bunq is a service-oriented organization. So we charge a couple of euros a month, which means that our interests are aligned with our users. So if we create a product people love to use, they will be willing to pay that couple of euros. If we don't, they won't. So our business reality, our commercial existence, is completely based on the fact that we make our users happy. That is completely different.
So can we tease out of that kind of a habit of yours? Because I think this actually goes back to TransIP and then forward. And then a lesson learned, which is this kind of customer obsession concept. Like you if there's one thing you do is you zero tightly into like, who is it that's going to use this and how do we serve them?
Like with the coffee machine.
The coffee machine, yes.
Yeah.
That coffee machine should not have had the extra button, basically.
No.
If they'd known the users, they would have known everybody's touching the freaking screen.
One field test, and they would have fixed it.
So this is consistent. Like as a learning to other entrepreneurs, you're saying, guys, gals, everyone.
Look how your product is used. When people do things wrong, don't tell them they're doing it wrong, which is something I see many people do, also internally within bunq. Learn that is apparently the intuitive way a human brain uses a product, change the product.
You said it took you 1.5 years to find out if the problem was big enough, and just maybe take us through your thinking about when you start a business, when you decided, okay, this is really going to take off, when you started to figure out how you were going to make that difference and how you were going to take it to where the company is now, or maybe until the moment where you accepted external investors into the company.
I think, I started my first business when I was 16, and whatever you do and spend time and energy on, you'll get better at it, right? So by the time I got to decide whether I wanted to start another business and what business, I think it's fair to say that I was quite good at it. So for me, starting a business just for the sake of money and just making a working business wasn't enough challenge anymore. Been there, done that, more than once. So I wanted to do something that brought a positive impact to the world. It was a long journey. I had a lot of different routes I could take. Also considered not starting a business, but having more focus on my personal life. Things didn't work out that way. So, that was one of the possibilities too. Because I think one of the things to take into consideration is, like with any top performers, whether it's athletes or musicians or entrepreneurs, you can only do it if it has your full attention and energy. So I was aware of that back then. I think I was 28. So that was the thing. The other thing was, okay, I considered only doing like NGO stuff, like clean water in Africa. I literally considered that. But those things kind of fell away because I figured, how cool would it be? So bunq is not, I never, like with the fundraise, which I guess we'll talk about in a bit, it is very rare for me to make a move for just one reason. I usually make a move that hits multiple goals at the same time. So with bunq, we kind of set the first steps in changing an entire industry that would then help that industry to become more customer serving, which is important for us all. At the same time, for me, it was also an opportunity to try to get the Netherlands back on the world map again, in that sense. Because I felt that this country has so much great people, so much talent, great infrastructure, and I just, at the time, couldn't understand why the Netherlands, despite having a lot of great companies from the past, like Shell, KLM, AkzoNobel, DSM, didn't really have big consumer successes recently anymore. I know everybody talks about Booking, but Booking only became successful when Priceline, which is an American company, took over. And more recently, we have obviously Adyen, which is a great success, but it's B2B. It's not a B2C proposition. So in my book, the last big B2C success was TomTom, which is now 20-something years ago. So, I couldn't understand at the time why such a great country wasn't more prominent on the world stage. So that was a thing for me too. And lastly, it was also an interesting thing for me to experiment whether you could create a business model that inherently makes profit by doing good for the world, effectively merging capitalism and commercial reality, which we know works, with public services, NGO, whatever you want to call it. Purpose, which we know we need.
And if you look now where bunq is, do you feel that people understand that
No.
that proposition?
No.
Does that trouble you?
No.
You don't. I mean, because something about changing the world is also moving people and moving perceptions, and that's you find that bunq is known. What is bunq known as for you in your perspective?
I think bunq is known internationally for being the first and greatly innovative. Globally speaking, not just pan-European, globally speaking, I know bunq is very well regarded and researched for our ability to understand customers and translate that into a UX. That is going to be the next thing. Sometimes we run ahead of the curve a little bit too much, and then we slow down and then wait for the world to catch up. bunq is known for being technically very adept and for generally, I know some banks have teams of people who basically dissect our app to understand what the next thing is going to be and to figure out whether they should follow or not. That is a huge impact for a small company. And I'm very proud of that, by the way. So I think, in the business sector of finance, that's how bunq is known. I think for normal people, since recently, bunq is known as a fintech unicorn. And before that, probably as the bank guys that, they were quite different. People couldn't quite explain why, but they could feel it when they used the product.
Well, and this is the place where you get a bank account, whereas in many other places it was difficult.
I think that's
increasingly difficult.
That's on the superficial layer. That's on the top layer. So that's the reason why you would consider bunq. But once you actually start using it, and we see this with they become emotionally detached to it. It becomes more than just a bank account, and that's very fascinating to see because who gives a shit about their bank account? Bunq users do.
In a sense, maybe this is a bit of a softball question, but you would like people not to limit bunq to being a bank. Fair?
Yes, very fair. I don't think we're a bank. Well, we have a banking permit, but we're changing what a bank can be. So we're this new thing for which no word exists yet.
Financial services is too limiting.
It's
Or
too
it has too much
abstract.
connotation on something else.
It's
right?
too abstract.
Yeah.
But it is more accurate.
If we track to the entrepreneur journey on bunq, let's just stay on bunq scope for the sake.
Yeah.
You know, there's a time that comes when you're feeling like, all right, this is going to work. You know, you had the idea, you got it out in the market, you did your testing, you know, your field testing, whatever the case may be. But then somewhere it starts to organically move, maybe even faster than you expected. There's that sort of, and the term is used, product market fit, but I'm sort of curious, like, when was that moment? And then did you guys proactively play into it, or were you concerned? Or when was that moment for bunq? And then how did you react in terms of action?
We are now at the moment that we have a product market fit in the Netherlands for some time now. And I think it has to do with the ease of use of signing up. But it is, and this is something that that I'm still working on, but it is mostly focused on a bank and not all the other cool things we do. So I don't know how to solve that yet. We're still working on that. But I think we saw that and we tried to replicate it in the other countries around us, like Germany and France. And actually, right before the Corona crisis hit, we started seeing an uptick in Germany and in France for different reasons. The Germans like the control and the privacy aspect of bunq. The French like the absence of bureaucracy and the great UX. So we saw that. And then, you know, Corona hit, was an uncertain time. And so we cut all the marketing spend. And, you know, as a bank, you need to have a minimum level of brand awareness before people consider you. And so things kind of slowed down. But I think it's about December 2019, January 2020 when we noticed.
You tell that story a bit like, you know, again, with the full disclosure, you tell that story like the world went flat, but it didn't. You're still growing. You were just growing slower.
Yeah.
Right. It's like the story wasn't we stopped growing. The story was we were growing slower than the year before.
No, we weren't growing slower than the year before.
Okay.
We were growing slower than we wanted because we cut away 85% of our marketing spend
during this time.
And we were growing, and the mix of the growth was also different because we were investing in Germany and France for that growth engine to start, and then we kind of killed it off. And so the growth is, I think, for 90% in the Netherlands still, or 85%.
Well, as we are...
but we are coming, don't fear, my German and French friends. Don't worry.
As we're touching on Germany and France, so what is your strategy to go international, and why do you choose those two countries? And can you take us through that experience?
Yeah, sure. So when I started with France IP, I was still very young, not a lot of gray hairs. At the time, you know, I started in the Netherlands. The code base was largely Dutch. Documentation was largely Dutch. And then we figured, hey, you know, after a couple of years, because I really didn't have any money, so I had to make do at the time. Maybe also interesting to know for people is there was a time where you didn't get money for a startup. You actually needed to fund it yourself, and the business model actually needed to make a profit because there was nobody else giving you any money. So I'm talking about those ancient history times.
Making money.
Nobody makes money anymore. Well, except for my
What crazy talk is this?
So we focused on becoming profitable because, you know, first business, it was very scary. I was responsible for many people's lives and, you know, their mortgages and stuff like that. So being financially healthy was very important, and we focused in the Netherlands because we had a product market fit and things were growing anyway. And why go to another country when you're growing in the Netherlands already? That was a mistake. So by the time we wanted to go abroad, and I think this was in 2006, only 3 years after the start of Trans IP, we just failed. We failed. We utterly failed. And we failed because, and this is very interesting, because the core, once something is in your DNA, it's almost impossible to change it. So the
what
core was
the
Dutch.
DNA that like
The Dutchness.
You didn't start with international mindset. You started with a Dutch mindset.
Exactly. So, we would get 3 or 4 English-speaking people. Everybody would speak Dutch. And they felt left out. We would hire 5 Spanish people to offset the Spanish market, but all the Dutch efforts always got prioritized over Spain. Why? Because there were 70 people concerned about the Netherlands and 5 about Spain. We didn't have the financial money to hire 70 people in Spain. Plus, it didn't make any business sense who hires 70 people with the 5 people. So we kind of got backed into this corner where we had this really great product, like really great. TransIP still today, even though the innovation kind of slowed down after I left, but still today is regarded as the best in class in the web hosting and domain name world. We had this great product, but it was only in the Netherlands. So then after that failed, I figured, okay, let's try to do what Booking did. So we have a great product. Let's find a distribution partner. Failed there too. That was my first real experience with the corporate world, where things move slow and decisions are made based on downside risk rather than upside potential. At the same time, we continued to grow, so we started doing M&A ourselves. And, we grew big like that because, as you guys probably know, TransIP now is the world's 3rd largest web hosting and domain name provider. So it's called Team Blue.
So all the international expansion came through M&A and partnerships?
Yeah.
Okay. So you basically acquired your way into new markets as a conscious strategy.
Because we were financially healthy.
Yeah. So then again, therein lies a lesson for those who if they're struggling with their international capabilities, there may be another path.
Yeah, there's many ways to skin a cat, as the Americans say, I guess.
Now we move to bunq. You chose another way.
Yeah.
So is that based on your lessons at TransIP?
Yeah, it's even in my book. So I wrote the book somewhere in between as well. It's in Dutch, unfortunately, not a mistake. Won't make that mistake again. But it was. It's called.
There are translators,
I have been asked if I read it, and I said I can't. It's in Dutch, and he said.
Ondernemers
he said go
hebben
learn
nooit
Dutch.
gelukt. Entrepreneurs never catch a break, and I think it's the number one biggest lesson in that book. Like think globally from day one.
Mm-hmm. But you could have thought, okay, we found another strategy. We can actually acquire our way into new markets, or you were not satisfied with the results. Okay. So it worked as a secondary strategy.
Business-wise, we're very successful, but the integration isn't as good as it could, and therefore the user experience isn't as good as it should, and therefore I'm not happy.
Yeah. Okay. So back to bunq.
Back to bunq. With that lesson, expensive lesson learned from day one, everything at bunq has been in English. We've hired international people from day one. The office is in a location that is more exciting for international people. So TransIP started in Gouda because I just lived there. And then moved to Leiden, which is a lovely city, but it is very Dutch, as you well know. For bunq, we only had the choice Amsterdam, Rotterdam, or not Netherlands.
Amsterdam it was.
And Amsterdam it became.
Okay, and then you built the company over a period of 8-9 years.
Yeah.
And then
long years.
And so when did you decide to go to Germany and now to France? And was that postponed? I mean, you would talk a bit about obviously your
the complexity of bunq is that it's a regulated business. Mm-hmm. So with an unregulated business, thanks to the power of the internet, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But with bunq, we actually had to do the paperwork before we were allowed to do business in Germany. Mm-hmm. So that took quite some time. And we kind of finished the paperwork, and then we went at it the bunq way. So we opened the doors, but we didn't advertise yet because we wanted to see how the Germans used the product and what we could improve, how many start buttons of the coffee machine we had to remove for it to become a success. And then we kind of got there late 2019, early 2020, but then we decided for the safe route of not spending a lot of money.
Looking back, would you have gone earlier? Or
no.
Is there a moment? Is that the right moment to go international or not?
We went as quick as we could. So we started filing the paperwork the day we got the permit, and we went international. I do think that if I had been more open to investors, we would have been more international than we are today. At the same time, if I had, it's not all good, because if we had, Jesus Christ,
had we done that,
thank you, then some of the pivots we made, which were mind-boggling at first and looking back are completely logical, wouldn't have been accepted by investors. So we would have, had to face different dilemmas and different issues.
But it seems like, and we get to the investors as well, but now with taking on board investors, you also made a big pivot. So
or
was this already part of your strategy and you just needed investors?
It's a timing thing.
Okay.
It's a timing thing.
All right, so we've walked through a little bit of the history and bring us up to sort of relatively current state. There's a lot of decisions in those 8 or 9 years that we haven't touched on yet, but I think there's always the question. We've talked about capital. You've talked about saying there was a reason not to take it. There's a double-edged sword in a way.
It's a double-edged, yes.
Right. So, and there's a lot of ways to take that. Yeah. But now, just to bring us all up to, there is a capital infusion expected or in landing. Yeah. So maybe you can share a little bit what that is, and then we can ask you a couple questions on that one.
So I think there's a right time for everything. And obviously I'm maybe a bit seasoned or old or old-fashioned, whatever naming you want to call it. But I think at the beginning it's more healthy if people focus on the product market fit and concern themselves mostly about users and about a healthy business model, and then take on capital. So that's what we did at bunq. But once you find the product market fit, then you need to have the bravura to, go out there and make your mark. And I think that's what we're doing right now.
So that's the moment has arrived.
The moment has arrived.
And maybe can you just describe for the people listening, like what it is and why you decided this was the right thing to do?
For us, it was, so as we just talked about DNA and how difficult it is to change DNA, a couple of things came together. So I think a part of our DNA is now set in stone, which is good. The user centricity, the love for the product and the attention to detail. And no investor can change that. So if you're listening, forget it, guys. It's not going to change. At the same time, we found the product market fit. So we're not fueling a business model that is effectively failing, which I sometimes suspect some companies to do. We're spending this money to fuel our growth. The business model is healthy. When those two came together, all we needed was to know for certain that we could use that money to grow somewhere. And that somewhere is France and Germany. So when those things came together, that flagged for us the option or the consideration to start getting a investor on board. Now, going back to what I said earlier, I never make one move for one reason. Because in our search for an investor, we also searched for an investor who could bring more to the table than just money. Because there's plenty of money to go around now. And this particular investor also had a company in its portfolio that was of interest to us. This company is called Capital Flow. They share the same value in the sense that they're very close to their customers. And by combining Capital Flow, who is an SME lender, with the deposits we have at bunq, both companies become significantly more profitable. So everybody wins.
So like if I flip this back to the entrepreneur lesson, you've said it, in case anybody missed it, don't make a move for a single reason. Make sure there's multiple goals that get hit.
I wouldn't say that, but that's not the way I do things. I mean, different things work for different people. This works for me.
Yeah, but you would have acquired a company even if you wouldn't have had this investor. Well, no, because acquiring a company
but then
made
financially
business
it would
sense.
have been a bit of a stretch given
Of course.
the numbers we're talking about.
Yeah, but you could have found another way of financing it than the portfolio, than the VC that invested in them before. Yeah, because and you're. I mean, if you look at choosing your investors, there's a lot to do about that. I mean, and some of your compatriots that we have had here, or how do you call them?
The other companies.
One of your colleagues here, they have very different views on different aspects of this, but all agree on that it's super important to find those investors that will run that extra mile with you, and that choosing them is really important. And very often there's a lot of criticism of the domestic market. You must have been going around and checking out many investors in the Netherlands and abroad. What made you choose, beyond that they had this company in their portfolio?
So that's a lot of questions in one.
So basically, just how do you come to choose your investor if it's not just for this portfolio company?
Okay, so all investors always tell you the same story because they know what entrepreneurs want to hear. So for me, as we say in Rotterdam, geen woorden maar daden. So I tend to look at what investors do rather than what they say. So that's one of the things.
And can you make that concrete?
Yeah, like if you look at their portfolio companies, obviously everybody says just call some references, but the references they give you are only the companies that they know are going to be happy with them. So that's irrelevant. So what I tend to do is I look at the fund's mandate. Is where in the funding cycle is the fund? How big is the fund? Which part of the fund is already invested? What are the engagement rules for the fund? How long have the people of the fund been there? What's their track record previously? So that's the stuff that I look at. And the talk, I mean, as I tell the many people who have tried to court bunq, like, let's skip the wishy-washy, how you're different than all the rest, because you will really understand entrepreneurs and do what I need. So I'm going to assume that. Tell me how you're different.
It's a really enviable position in a way for a lot of these companies versus a lot of these companies where you're funding this on your own. So when you go to choose an investor, you're a bit more selective. Or maybe you're saying this is the process everyone should follow.
I think this is the process that everyone should follow. And also, I think as an investor, despite the fact that people might give you more of a hard time, I would always opt for a person who knows what they're doing and are giving you a hard time. In the long run, that's just better. But, that's just me. Anyways, so that was the thing. The second thing was, so I look at the fund and the principles and the statistics and the information on that. Then I look at, the people, because at the end of the day, everything is done by people, and what their values are and what their considerations are. So I look at values because, as with any marriage, you need to share the same core values. Otherwise, things will go bad after the honeymoon period is over.
How do you test them? Is it spending a lot of time with them?
No, again, you see what they do.
Yeah.
So in the case of Pollen Capital, they had already invested in quite a number of sustainable and green businesses, and they also turned some of the businesses they had into being more green. So that's a value we shared. In the case of Capital Flow, it was clear. I mean, just speaking to the CEO, it's completely clear. The guy, he knows his customers by name. He knows what they're doing. So he knows he has that intimate relationship with them.
So I want to move off capital and to something that's a bit more operational. And it's really up to you, Ali, if you're willing to share. Because again, I know some things. So there is there's a definition of customer obsession in the world, which is like go focused on your customer, know what they want, build products, move on. But it would be fair to say that at bunq you may have taken that to new heights, with how you center in on a particular demographic, how you structure the company, how you look at that. And then again, it's up to you in terms of how much you're willing to share about that. But I think there's an interesting story inside of being obsessed about a customer, zeroing in on that customer, and then moving the company in a direction to serve that customer.
Yes, that's right. So are you talking about Eva's journey now? Okay.
I'm letting you talk about Eva's journey.
Yeah, I'd love to, but I think it is so abstract and big. Maybe we can save it for next time.
So let's then bring it into a short statement of, if you are truly believe in centering on a customer, there are more choices than just doing the market research.
Yes.
There's a lot of tactical things that are possible
definitely.
to set that up.
So I think what Joe is pointing towards is something we call Eva's journey, and the organization changes we made to make sure that not just the business model, but also the organization is inherently aligned with our customers' wants and needs, or our users, because we like to call them users. There's difference in our perception. But that is such an abstract and big thing that I think we need more time to dive into it, although it is a good question.
Thanks, I feel better.
Right. Didn't feel that one.
Yes.
But then maybe go on to the organization. So if your organization is as obsessed like you with the customer, how important is the organization itself to you as an entrepreneur, your people, and what kind of culture are you aspiring to build, or have you built in bunq?
I think bunq's culture is very unique, especially to the Netherlands. It is a performance culture. It is a culture that I was just speaking to a very old HR person, old as in experienced, I guess, and he's very Dutch. And he says, wow, this sounds really interesting, because in many Dutch companies, the average is pursued, making sure that everybody's on board, everybody's happy, and the common denominator is that. And the flip side of that is that every employee is expected to be good in a broad sense of skills. I think bunq is different. We don't care if you're imperfect. If you're really good at what you do, you can just do that. And in that sense, I think bunq doesn't focus on consensus and keeping the average. Bunq focuses on success. In that sense, it's more aligned with the US way of working.
How does that motivate people? I mean, and how do you ensure that all those and that whole group kind of works together as one? Even if you say you might be really good at one. This is Johan Cruijff's thing, right? He says, if you're good in attack, don't try to make him a defender as well. But they have to work as a team. So how do you?
I say that very often. It's a shame I never got to learn that.
But But how do you make them work as a team, and how do they also share in the company's?
Well, it's very simple to make them work as a team, because once you know that the guy who is standing in the goal is the best keeper, this allows you as the attacker or as the midfield to confidently place yourself near the opponent's goal. You can only do that if you have the best goalie behind you. And once you have the best goalie behind you, there is no doubt that you need to work together. You cannot win anything by yourself. Different question is, what do you do when you have two goalies? But I mean, I think that's healthy competition, and whoever is the best may win. But I think once you get the best people in who know what they're good at and also know what they're not good at, they will organize themselves into a functional team.
So you believe in self-organization?
Yeah, I think that is... So ownership is a big thing at bunq. Where you're held accountable for a certain set of results. I mean, like the soccer field, it is divided up in smaller bits, and you're responsible for your own little patch of land. And however you do that, by cooperating with others or etc., doesn't matter as long as you hit your targets.
And we also technically do a lot around remuneration, options, and that. Do you believe in giving everybody a share in the company, or how do you motivate people and connect them with the collective output of bunq?
I believe in having a fair remuneration, and I believe for bunq specifically. But if we zoom out from bunq and look at the sector as a whole, like all of the companies, I think many people have a Me Too kind of mentality when it comes to HR. They don't really think about it. They don't think about the organization. It kind of happens to them. Whereas I feel that, it's the people and the culture that make your company. So I think what we do at bunq is we know what we're trying to achieve. We know what change we want to inspire to the world. We know what user demographic is most susceptible to that change, and therefore our champion, that's Eva, Eva's journey. And then we know what person will be the best servant to Eva, the best person to serve Eva, the best person to please her, the best person to excite her, the best person to help her when she needs it.
In case anybody didn't pick up on that, Eva is the ideal customer profile. She is the customer profile. So when you talk about
where
serving,
we're targeting,
that's just a clarification for the listeners.
Yeah, exactly, where we're targeting for. And then we have Adam and Eve, as the ideal person serving Eva. And we're actually in the middle of a process of redoing our entire strategy around Adam, because the last one we did is about 3 years old, and the world has changed, and we have changed. And I think it is important to work your way back from the type of person you want and make sure that whatever it is you give those people is fair for what they're expected to. So it goes beyond just money or options or a 4-day work week or a 6-day work week or, working from home or not working from home. It needs to be a coherent package that resonates and aligns with, in our case, Adam's needs.
But would you go as far as you're going with Eve in terms of targeting and personalizing that reward package, or the total package for your Adam?
Yes. If you have a gasoline car, diesel won't do you much good.
Yeah, but it's a bit more than diesel and gasoline.
Speak care of the
the
embedded metaphors we continue down the line. For anyone who's lost the plot, Eva is the customer and Adam is the employee.
Adam is the employee, and the question is, like, are you putting as much energy into Adam as in Eve? And I think you are. But it's interesting to know about how in your vision of your company that serving your employee is a critical competitive asset, or a critical part of your strategy. So maybe if you can elaborate a bit on it and get out of the abstract and say, what is it?
Yeah,
it's obviously a conscious thing now. It's not something you're just spinning around on.
So I get what you're saying, but I think the most important thing is for CEOs to figure out, where am I heading, who's going to get me there, how can I make the people who get me there happy. That's what I'm saying, and I know it sounds simple, and I know it sounds abstract, but I really do think, knowing quite a number of CEOs, both from startups as well as scale-ups as well as corporates, not many people actually have a people agenda. They just don't. I think the most advanced strategy on people I've ever read was whether you want to be on the 80 percentile or the 75 or the 50 or the 25. That's it.
Okay. We go across these different topics each time we have a podcast. We look at product market fit. We talk about talent, capital, international. One of the things that we didn't ask you so far was, like, were there any major pivots along the way that you guys had to take, like big monster decisions where you had to, like, turn the whole thing left or right? Or was it been on the straight path?
We know they're there, because otherwise
you mentioned
you
a little
wouldn't
bit
have
on
taken an investor, right? You mentioned it before.
Yeah, maybe. So the first major question was, should we apply for a banking permit?
So all the way back to that. Interesting.
And I was always a strong proponent. The people actually doing the work, not so much.
They didn't want to get lumped in with the banks. They didn't want to be limited, or
why don't we start? We can start earlier. We can, we can get a banking permit later. But for me, it was very important because of the DNA thing. I thought if we don't do the banking permit from the start, it's going to be much harder later, and we will run into issues. Now,
so that's a key decision. Yeah, that's not a pivot. Or
well,
were you on another track?
That's a decision where we didn't pivot.
Yeah.
Then, before launch, we pivoted a number of times on the way we wanted to charge our users. So first we wanted to do business only, then we did both, then we did a fixed fee, then we did and we worked out all these models, right? And then at the last minute, we decided to go on a pay-per-use program. About a year and a little bit in, we pivoted back to fixed fee. Was a big change.
And why?
Because we saw that 28%, I believe, or 31, something like that, % of the questions were about, hey, I don't understand my invoice. And we were like, we're about the start button, the coffee machine
back
start
to the
button.
coffee machine.
We were like, okay, we figured pay-per-use would be more fair because these are recurring themes, right? Fairness, easiness, sustainability. A decision is not the same thing as het is niet zo voor de hand liggend.
No. And I guess part of the pivoting is also did you make decisions that you had to come back to? Did you?
Well,
are there
so
some
we had to come back
considerable?
to
This one was obvious.
Yeah.
Are there other things?
Well, because of my background, we noticed at a certain point in time that we were getting a lot of tech-savvy users.
Your background being with
TransIP and being a tech guy. And
so you were in the community and you had a network. Okay.
Yeah, and people knew me for that. And I think my natural instinct is also to build a great tech product, right? So people were really happy with that, with the API and everything. But we noticed that this kind of pulled us in a direction that diverted from the goal we had from Ava. And then I don't think it was a conscious decision. But we said, hey, we're doing too many things. We're a small company. The easiest way to go to shit is by not focusing. And so we adapted all our processes and all our forms and said, okay, if we want to do X, how does it align with Ava's wants and needs? And just by doing so, we started focusing more and more on Ava and kind of alienated a part of the tech community.
Maybe we go for some rapid fire questions. Across the different businesses that you had, can you think of one or two of the hardest decisions that you've had to make?
The very first time I had to fire a person, the very first time I had to hire a person.
That must have all been in a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So firing still remains the most difficult thing.
Yeah. For me, especially if a person is very much aligned, culturally, but they're not performing, then it really breaks my heart. It still does.
Across the different guests that we've had, a lot of the entrepreneurs will comment on different roles in the company that they wish they'd hired earlier.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I wish I'd gotten this or that, the other. Any of those that come out for you? Are there any particular roles in the company you're God, I should have hired that sooner?
Obviously, if you know where to find them, I have a list for you right now.
Yeah. Other than the current hires, maybe
critical ones.
No, but I mean... you have to take into consideration that bunq is now my 4th company or so.
Yep.
And in between, I've been involved left and right with a number of companies. So I understand this question, but I think I either answer these questions in the context of TransIP, which was my first company 18 years ago, or I answer them truthfully for bunq, which is, for most of these questions, going to be, well, not really,
Because you did it before.
Yeah. I did it,
today, if I'd asked you 10 years ago, you might have had a different answer, basically. How do you, just as operational, how do you structure your work week or your routine? I mean, are there ways you prioritize? How do you make, let's just go with the obvious. How do you structure your week?
I like the operational bit. So bunq is a very creative company. So one of the things that we set out right from the start was to keep the operational bits as small as possible. So by a very simple mechanism, So we have weeklies, which means that any decision that needs to pass me needs to be submitted every Monday before 1700. And then everybody gets a 15 or 20 minute slot on Tuesday to go through it. Now, this might seem very simple, and it is, but this teaches people to look ahead and to plan ahead. And this is quite interesting because, so for example, the other day we had a legal person who was still new to bunq, not familiar with this process. By the way, we really need to fix our onboarding, but that's a separate thing. Not familiar with this process. And he needed my signature on something. And I told him, well, see you on Monday. And then it was, yeah, but I need it now, and etc. I said, yeah, I'm very sorry. See you on Monday. Now, obviously, in a first reaction, this is not very helpful to that person. But then he came back on Monday. He said, you know what? I thought about it over the weekend. You're completely right. This makes so much sense. All the other companies I've ever worked at, people are running around with papers all week. You need to sign left and right. It's one big chaotic mess. Here, everything is structured. So I think at bunq, we do everything in rhythms. So we set a OKR every quarter. We calculate back to weekly milestones. We calculate the weekly milestones back to daily to-do tasks. We report on them. We look ahead. If we don't hit a task, how are we going to mitigate? We bring out weekly report on our progress towards the OKR. Then we mitigate. And all of this is made so that actually the operational burden becomes smaller.
As you explain it, it sounds heavy, but then you say, no, actually, because it's a known rhythm, somehow it's lighter.
Yeah, it's lighter. It's like brushing your teeth every day.
If you added up all the minutes, it might seem like a lot, but actually...
That was only Monday and Tuesday.
I was going to say, that was just Monday and Tuesday.
So, and what happens
the rest of the week?
The rest of the week.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So due to historical reasons, Wednesday has always been my trans IP day. I kind of abused my Wednesday for bunq for many years, but now it's back. So Wednesday is the day where I do things like this. Thursday, I usually have a lot of meetings with other people, with new people, or with potential partnerships or stuff. Friday, I used to review code, but we switched over to continuous deploy, so that's throughout the week now. So Friday, these days, so things are getting into order, right? So bunq is getting into a different structure. I don't need to be everywhere all the time anymore. So Fridays, I often pick one project that I think deserves my interest, and I chew on it on Friday and over the weekend. And then Monday, the cycle starts again.
If you could pick anyone, living or dead, to get advice from, who would it be?
Friedrich Nietzsche, Thomas Alva Edison, Steve Jobs.
Why Nietzsche?
Interesting guy.
Interesting writing.
Guy. And Leonardo da Vinci.
So what question would you ask Nietzsche?
What question would I what's the sense of it all?
Okay, you think he'd have the answer?
No, but
You'd
it would be an interesting answer.
Yeah.
All right, look, like everyone who attends our podcast, we sort of leave open the last question and sort of say, look, there's a lot of people out there now. We like to think of it as a lot of people listening.
Thousands, 100,000s, isn't it? Millions.
Got to be continents worth of humans that are listening to this.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're like, well, what's the words of advice? So you're sitting on where you're sitting. You've still got a lot ahead of you, a lot of decisions with the bunq, a lot more to go. Words of advice to anybody who's getting it going or just getting to the scale point now that you'd think, maybe you wish somebody would have given you when you hit that spot the first time.
Most people you'll talk to don't know what they're talking about. Believe in yourself and just do it. Worst that can happen is you'll fail, you'll learn, you'll pick yourself up again, and you'll do it right the next time.
Ali, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you for listening to The Scale Lab, a podcast brought to you by TechLeap. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please share it on your network via social media and give us your feedback. See you on the next episode.